Hi everyone, this is Drew Wharton from Nimble Leader, here to speak with you about Profit Now, Exit Later. During our program, we're going to cover 4 areas that are critical to the successful exit of your business, and today I'm going to focus on the tools for profit, axioms for improving profit and cash flow without a change in strategy. The goal is to increase operating profit with minimal risk so that when you do exit within 1 to 5 years, you achieve the highest multiple of profit at time of sale. So without further ado, let's jump into our session today. During our time together, I'll briefly touch on organizational performance, key characteristics impacting every business. We'll segue to operating discipline, principles that are fundamental to every manufacturer. We'll then share several key financial relationships that are axiomatic regardless of business, whether you're a manufacturer, distributor, or service provider. We'll then focus on market position, the one principle that can make or break your business. And then from there, we will move on to tools for profit, specific to driving increased operating profit and cash flow, importantly, without a change in strategy, and then close out with potential next steps that may impact your preparation for potential exit. Now, all business results are a function of team resonance. You know this, how well your employees work together. Clearly, this is impacted by business culture, what it feels like to work in your company, which to a great degree is impacted by you and your leadership practices. Other factors include external marketplace, internal dynamics, team agility, or the ability to get things done, and finally, operating rigor, how a business tactically goes about driving operating profit and cash flow. Today, for the rest of this session, we're going to focus specifically on operating rigor. When I work with leaders, in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking about something called the house of profit. Every business has one. At the top, you'll see the roof, operating profit and cash flow. If a business is functioning well, operating profit and cash flow are strong, protecting the team within, addressing customer needs, managing business processes, addressing financials. Out of sight is the foundation, something I call the tools for profit, or the linkage between market position, what you stand for in the minds of your customers, and what you do as leaders to manage the price you charge, the volume sales you generate, your product and service mix, your cost, or importantly cash burn, and your working capital, the short-term investment in your business, things like inventory and receivables. Interestingly, the unseen foundation impacts how well the roof of the house protects the inhabitants within. If the foundation is strong, the whole structure is strong. Now, when it's sunny outside, no one really cares about the foundation. However, what happens when there's a jarring downturn? Well, usually you'll see working capital and cost increase because the business is not selling as much as it did previously. Now, when volume sales decrease, you're also likely to see pressure on price as the sales team looks for ways to turn the tide. In essence, the entire team is focused inward, trying to stop the hemorrhaging of profit and cash flow. So let's take a look at a few numbers and understand the relationships that are axiomatic for all businesses. Now, I realize that not everybody's a CFO, so let's work with the simple P&L. Let's say we sell 100 units a dollar piece, generating $100 in net sales, and $10 in operating profit, 10% of sales. This business also has an investment in working capital of $30. Now, if I take a 3% price increase and I don't grow volume, my sales still go to $103, and my profitability rises from $10 to $13, or 30% increase. In essence, 3% equals 30%. That 3% price increase has the same profit impact as a 10% reduction in cost, a 12% increase in sales, and a 10% reduction in working capital. Now, I understand that working capital doesn't impact operating profit directly, but it does impact cash. And so if I can operate my business on a base of $27 in working capital versus $30, I've essentially picked up $3 that I can reinvest in the business. Now, when you look at this, price is the most powerful tool for profit relative to the other decisions that you might make. However, it has a double-edged sword because if I reduce price by 3% and I don't grow my volume, then my profit plummets to $7 or a 30% decrease versus the base case. Now, earlier we were talking about the sales organization saying they needed price relief in a down market to be able to maintain their customer base and possibly grow volume. but you have to be really careful here. Because if I cut price by 3%, I actually have to grow volume 25% to drive the same level of profitability, $13, as that 3% price increase. How many people in this room here are willing to sign up for a 25% increase in volume? Now conversely, if I increase price 3%, I can actually lose 5% in volume and still grow my profit to $12 or a 20% increase versus the base case. What's important to notice here is that these relationships are axiomatic for all businesses, for every business in this room. And so we really have to take care to make sure that the entire team is aware of these relationships when making decisions around how to move the business forward. The goal is to have a strong foundation so that when the downturn comes, you want your team focused outward, not inward, deploying the tools for profit to effectively address a dynamic marketplace while optimizing profit and cash flow. Now, when we think about the tools for profit, there's one variable, though, that is first among equals. Market position, what you stand for in the minds of your customers, will have a direct impact on your ability to manage the other tools. And if you have a differentiated product, your ability to get a price increase in a down market substantially goes up, whereas if you have a commodity offering, your ability to manage any of the profit levers is substantially reduced. So whenever I work with the leadership team, I ask everyone to complete a simple exercise on their own. So two target customers, your company is a blank competitive frame of reference, and that simply is, if they don't buy from you, who do your customers buy from? That does what? What's your point of difference? Now, when we complete this exercise and post the results to the wall, what do you think happens? Well, almost always, everyone is all over the map. A few years ago, I worked with a middle market wall manufacturer, and the leadership team came up with the following: 12 target customers, 8 competitive frames of reference, and 7 different value propositions. In many respects, this kind of outcome represents a lack of focus. Now, when that team is together and they're trying to address problems, their ability to come to agreement is substantially better than if they're operating each individually in their silos. And oftentimes, when a leader is in their silo and they need to make a decision, well, how are they going to do that? They're going to make that decision consistent with how they think they are supporting the business. And if the leadership team is not aligned on a common understanding of market position for the business, this often results in burning cash needlessly as the company pursues multiple paths unrelated to their true value. So why might this happen? Now, whenever I work with a leadership team, I share the ladder of inference model developed by Chris Igeris from Harvard. So let's start at the bottom of the ladder. I see and experience things, I select data from what I observe, I add meaning, cultural and personal. I make assumptions based on the meaning I add. I then draw conclusions, adopt beliefs, and then I take actions on my beliefs. And when I step into that room with that leadership team, after they've already drawn conclusions, adopted beliefs, and taken actions on their beliefs, how easy is it for me to get them to consider an alternative? Well, it's pretty hard. Oftentimes they need to stick a dynamite, or they have to be in crisis mode to be able to consider alternatives. Now, the ladder of inference not only applies to the leadership team, it also applies to others within the organization. So if I think about the different cross-functional areas within a business, whether it's operations, sales, marketing, finance, HR, they all have a ladder of inference, which is based on how they view the world. And here's where you're going to have some conflict. So I might have the operations team very diligent, focused, basically say, the sales guys are not selling what we have. They keep selling futures, products that we don't have. Whereas sales might look at the operations group and say, we're not addressing customer need as quickly as we need to be able to capture the market. So there's a lot of internal strife within the business. And it's not only within the organization. When you think about different groups in terms of the markets, let's say I'm operating within the healthcare market space. How segment one, let's say acute care hospitals make decisions, could be very different than how ambulatory surgery centers, segment 2, make decisions, or how physicians' practices, segment 3, might make decisions. So you have differences both internally with the leadership team, with the different cross-functional teams, and then externally. And here's where you have to drive a consistency across the group in terms of how they're going to effectively make those decisions. And we went back to that simple exercise that I shared earlier about market position with the leadership team. It's a little bit of a trick exercise, but it's still very important as a first step. Yes, we want to understand who the target customers are, the competitive frame, and the point of difference, but each of these constituencies has their own decision makers within each area. So for example, target customers could be influencers that impact the decision, or the actual purchasers, purchasing department, or the consumers who actually consume the product. Point of difference value proposition, you have to monetize it. How are you going to establish a price? Are you based your value on the fact that you're economic or low-cost producer, or are you functionally superior in terms of having a tremendously advantaged product versus your competition, or do customers buy from you based on an emotional basis, where they've bought from you for the last 20 years, they like you, and they want to continue purchasing from you? Regardless, you want to have clarity around the positioning diagram here, the tree. You want to have access to what the collective team thinks about each of these areas, because it's going to be fundamental in terms of how you make decisions. Clearly, market position will have a huge impact in terms of your SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, business challenges and business priorities, and importantly, critical measures in terms of how are you going to measure success. All these elements impact the strategic leadership interactions that you have with your leadership team around how you're going to drive vision and mission for your business, strategy, core initiatives in terms of what you want to get done to drive the business forward within the next, let's say, 6 to 12 months, and then tactics and accountability. Who's going to do what? When is it going to get done? And then how much will it cost to make that happen? Now, some of you might be looking at me and saying, thanks, Drew. So what? Why should I care? And my response is pretty simple. I want to go back to the numbers. So if we go back to that initial P&L, right, where we had that base case of 100 units, now we want to break it out into product A and product B. And we see that product B sells at 10 units for $10 or $1 per unit. Now let's say we go through a rigorous market positioning exercise and we realize that the value to the customer is revealed to be $2 per unit, not $1. What are you going to do as a leadership team? Well, generally there's a pause, and then people might pipe up and say, well, take a price increase. And I might say, absolutely you want to take a price increase, but how much? And I suppose you could take it up to $2, but look, you're stewards for the business, you're managing risk, so maybe what you do is you take the price up 20%. And so if we take product B up from $1 to $1.20, generating $12 in net sales, then collectively the profit impact for the business is you're driving $12 versus that base case of $10. So essentially what you've done is you've increased total company profit 20% while impacting only 10% of the business. Now in my mind that's pretty smart. You're managing risk. And if you're able to succeed here, what you have is a potential price increase in year 2 to take it up again. Now this relates to the first dimension of profit, which is impact. You want to be cognizant of this dimension when you're sitting in the war room with your team. This will help you assess the risk and the opportunity of actions you might deploy in market. Remember, price is the most powerful tool for profit, and your relative success with all of these tools is linked to a clear understanding of your market position. The speed dimension helps you determine how you drive profit and cash flow now versus 6 months from now. Assuming I'm not tied to a contract, I can take price up immediately as well as reduce cost. Working capital reduction will also increase available cash, but the team will need time to make judicious cuts to SKUs and inventory. Whereas a sales increase and mix shift represent the longest time horizon as the customer decides when and if they will make a purchase. With respect to the third dimension, difficulty, reductions in cost of working capital are the least difficult. The team decides and then they act. Whereas an increase in price, a growth in sales, and a shift in product mix are most difficult to implement, involving a customer decision to purchase. Again, think of the power of your market position, the value proposition. The bottom line is that strong market position at the company level, and then as well, sub-positions for your products, your categories, and your market segments will have a huge impact on the power and the strength of your house of profit, your ability to drive profitability, and therefore increase the multiple of your business upon exit for sale. Potential next steps, and the assumption here is no incremental spend. Unless we find value for you that you choose to execute, there's no cost to you. The first area of focus is targeted cost reduction. We have found in 90% of the cases that companies often overspend 10 to 30% on their indirect costs. This can be a significant number. Second area is targeted price optimization. I've experienced many situations with past clients where they had value outliers that were not necessarily significant in terms of volume, but they were totally undervalued relative to price. And then by taking that price increase, they were able to drive significant improvement to their bottom line. The third area of focus is working capital management and SKU rationalization. This will require some analysis, but oftentimes we find that there are opportunity areas where you're able to reduce your SKUs and pick up some additional cash. The fourth area is AI lead generation. This is efficient revenue growth with your existing product line. Assuming we drive success in these three other areas, this fourth area might be an area that you want to focus to drive top-line growth. And finally, if you have not engaged in rigorous market positioning for your business, I view this exercise as a critical next step, and I'd be willing to facilitate this session at no charge, the first session, and you can decide how you want to proceed from there. Okay, everyone, that concludes our session for today. If you have questions, please reach out to me. I welcome the opportunity to speak with you. Take care.